Shabbat Shalom, everybody. As we are with a bunch of educators, we know that one of the part of the thing is time. And so we want to know that people's time are valuable. And so we said 12:30. Yeah, we said 12:30, and so we're going to start as close as 12:30, and we're not going to have that many announcers of announcers. So I'm just going to let David Alpert give a greeting, who will then introduce Ellen Wadowski, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Rabbi. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming to the Shabbat talk, but just to mention briefly the Shoah Remembrance Committee. Some of you who are here now are members of the committee. I'd like to invite the people who are here and members of TIGN to join the Shoah Remembrance Committee. We sponsor programs and work with Kristallnacht and Yom HaShoah. We have a wonderful book club that we now have, reading a book every month, and you're welcome to join those as well. If you're interested in participating, perhaps we could just send out an email to help you to identify who you are, so that we could then send out our emails to you for joining our committee meetings as well as our functions. Today, our speaker is going to be introduced by Ellen Wadowski, and I want to just say a couple of things about Ellen Wadowski and thank her for putting this together today. Ellen is shaking her head, no. Ellen is a librarian who has dedicated significant amounts of time to Holocaust education and remembrance, and has participated in some very interesting programs, including a program at Yad Vashem, which is how she got to know our speaker today. So Ellen, come on up. Okay, thank you, Ellen.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Rabbi Schweber. Thank you, Rabbi Stecker. So it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome my friend today to speak, Sheryl Ochayon. When I studied at Yad Vashem in 2017, which were the best 2 weeks of my life, actually, because it had been my dream to study at Yad Vashem. Sheryl was my lead teacher, the program director, and the first time I met her, we were on the bus. We came from the Prima Hotel. There were about 26 teachers. We didn't know each other, and every teacher got off the bus and was greeted by Sheryl with a very warm hug. And that immediately put me at ease, and I said, this is going to be amazing. And it was amazing, and I'm so delighted that you took time from your schedule to come and speak to us today. So with great pleasure, please welcome my friend Sheryl to speak to us. And I also wanted, this is how important the 2 weeks were to me. At the end of the 2 weeks, we all got a beautiful certificate, which is also hung in my living room. But this is a photo of the group participants that it's also so special to me. So if anybody wants to see it, I can pass it around. Just please be careful, because it's very special. Okay, and anyway, thank you so much for being here for what is going to be a very enlightening presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, David. And thank you very much to Ellen, who is just a treasure. And I have to say, every program that I do in the New York State area, Ellen is there. She's that involved in Holocaust education, and she's really, she's just amazing. So it's wonderful to be here, and I couldn't say no. When Ellen called me, I couldn't say no. So here's the story. I'll speak to you for however long you want. My husband Morris and I are here from Israel, which is where we live. And so if you have any questions about what's going on there, I'm also happy to take questions. But we'll talk a little bit about what's happening now and about Holocaust education in general. Just so that you know who I am, I come from Brooklyn, New York. In my former life, I was a lawyer. I went to Harvard Law School, which is not a great accomplishment these days when you have Claudine Gay running the institution. And believe me, she heard from me. She heard from me. Terrible. But I always felt, and I practiced for 30 years as a lawyer, and I never really felt like, and I never really, that was a great face, and I never really felt like I was accomplishing anything. But in the back of my mind, I have this heritage, this legacy that comes from the little woman who's sitting next to my husband in the red jacket. That's my mom. I'm gonna cry. My mom is a Holocaust survivor. When she was 6 years old, she went up with her family into an attic, and a good Polish family who, I don't think they read or wrote much. They were not educated people. They were farmers. They took 15 members of my mother's family and they hid them for 2 years in that attic. Yeah, for 2 years. And during that 2 years, his wife had a couple of miscarriages because of the stress. And during that 2 years, 3 of those 15 people passed away in the attic. And my mother came out of the attic at the age of 8 and never spoke about it, But my Aunt Sally, my mother's older sister, who used to be a docent actually at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust, Sally, always seemed to me that Sally was doing something very special by educating about the Holocaust. And so after 30 years of being a lawyer, I decided really that was quite enough. And I went to Yad Vashem, I took some courses, I became a guide in the museum, and then from there, I started working in the Educational Technologies Department, and then from there, I became the project director for Echoes and Reflections, which is the program that brought Ellen to Israel. What we are a program that teaches middle and high school teachers in the States how to teach the Holocaust to their students. And you think to yourself, well, why is this so important? I mean, the Jews in America are only 2% of the population. Why is it important that people learn about the Holocaust at all? Why? This is such a Jewish thing. Why is it important to teach middle and high school students about the Holocaust? But it's so important. It's so important because there are so many messages that you take with you in Holocaust education. It's not just, it's definitely about evil, and it's definitely about what happens when society kind of crumbles and how fragile democracy is, and all of these really, really important messages that you can get from teaching the Holocaust. But it's also about the human spirit. My mother's whole story is a testament to the spirit of human beings who in very, very dark times can just elevate themselves to these heights and do things that are absolutely unbelievable. How does a farmer take in 15 people in his attic and never tell his children and put his whole family at risk? You have to be a little bit maybe meshuggah to do something like that, but it's a measure of the human being. And that's part of what we teach. We also teach about prejudice, and we teach about racism, and we teach about intolerance. And I think one of the greatest messages, and that's where I can kind of relate to what's happening today, one of the greatest messages is this whole issue of being silent and how dangerous it is to be silent and to be indifferent. Elie Wiesel, once upon a time, said that silence and indifference are the greatest sin of all. And what am I talking about? Kristallnacht, the pogrom of Kristallnacht was almost 2 months ago at this point, November 9th, 1938, so 85 years ago this year. And one of the things that we use in Echoes and Reflections, we use a lot of testimonies. And we have a great testimony. It's by a man who was about 20 years old when he was a German school teacher. And he remembers very well, very distinctly, in Berlin, that he saw all these synagogues burning, didn't know what was going on, and he took his bicycle and he made a tour of all of Berlin. And this is a great testimony that we have. So unfortunately, I'm not playing his testimony for you today. You can't hear his voice. But he made a tour of Berlin with another friend of his, and they saw each and every synagogue, and they stopped at a place where there was a little man, it was a cigar shop. There was a little man, and there were 2 SS who were standing outside the cigar shop, and they were, Kristallnacht, there were a lot of storefronts that were broken into, and the glass was all over the sidewalks, and that's why they call it the Night of Broken Glass, which is what Kristallnacht means. And they made him get down on his knees and pick up all these little glass splinters. And Kurt Messerschmidt, who is the man who gives the testimony, says, I couldn't just stand there and watch him. The first thing I did was I got off my bicycle and I got down on my knees and I helped him pick up all of these little glass splinters. And I saw that there must have been about 40 other people. And they were all standing there and watching. And he said, and I know that some of them felt the same way that I did, that this man was being abused and that this man they should have been much more respectful of his dignity than that, than making him get on the floor and pick up all these little glass splinters. But he says, with all of these 40 people watching, they were all silent. And he says, silence is what did the harm. And I'm going to relate that here to the events of October 7th, because I think, what's been going on, unfortunately, in the whole world, and I'm not going to limit this to the United States, what's been going on in the whole world is we have been seeing this incredible rise in anti-Semitism. It's just been rising and rising, and every year the ADL reports more and more incidents, more and more violence, more and more hate speech against the Jews. I mean, Jews, we said 2% of the population, but at least 9% of the hate speech and hate crimes last year, at least, were directed against Jews. So it's a disproportionate number. And what happens is we've just kind of been watching this happen. We've been watching and watching and watching, and the world is very silent about it. And then you have an episode like October 7th. And when October 7th happened, I mean, thank God there were people who spoke out. There were a lot of people, a lot of good people who spoke out. But look at the UN. The UN still has not passed a resolution condemning what happened in Israel on October 7th. They're willing to pass a resolution that calls on Israel to put the guns down. They're willing to force Israel to come to a ceasefire, but there is still no resolution condemning the events of October 7th. Not only that, we know that there were a lot of rapes. We know that there were a lot of sexual crimes that were perpetrated against Israeli women. And it took the UN Commission on Women, it took them almost 60 days to condemn all of that. So this is the silence that we're talking about, the silence of the world. And that's, the connection that I want to make for you, because this is another thing that we learned from the Holocaust, that you can't be silent when something like this happens. You have to stand up and you have to speak out, because otherwise it just goes on and on and on, and it just doesn't stop. It just gets perpetrated. And so that's where I come out. I don't want to bore you guys too much. I don't know how long I should speak. But teaching the Holocaust is really, it's a wonderful way to teach about a lot of different things. We teach about tolerance, we teach about prejudice, we teach about stereotyping, and how stereotyping leads to anti-Semitism and leads to bigotry. We can go back 2,000 years. I mean, anti-Semitism is what we call the longest hatred. And it just goes all the way back, and it just continues and continues today. It takes a lot of new forms. One of the new forms that anti-Semitism takes is actually Holocaust denial or distortion. And you say to yourself, how could anyone deny the Holocaust? But it's a fact. People deny the Holocaust. A survey came out about 2 weeks ago, it was in The Economist, that said that in the age group from 18 to 29, 20% of Americans in that age group believed that the Holocaust was a myth. 20%, I mean, that's outstanding, that's crazy. And it makes you very uncomfortable. And I can tell you also, I mean, what the events of October 7th are already being denied. You see it all over the place. Israel made it up. Forget the fact that the Hamas terrorists were wearing GoPro cameras and filming the whole thing. No, this was Israel, with such a great security system and the intelligence that we have, this must have been, and it's a whole conspiracy theory. So Holocaust denial, Holocaust distortion, that's the new anti-Semitism. And it's something that we have to be very vigilant about. And the more you teach things like this, at least to open people's eyes about it and to make sure that they're aware. Genocide, for instance, if you want to talk about genocide, because the Holocaust was the genocide of the Jewish people. If you take a look at the UN definition of genocide, you will understand that Hamas is a genocidal organization. And a lot of the pro-Palestinians don't get this. They're not educated enough. They're not aware enough. They have the whole from the river to the sea mentality, which many of them maybe don't understand that that means a total erasure of Israel. But the bottom line is total erasure of Israel is a genocide. And the Hamas charter, which was written in 1988, black and white, still there, go into the internet, Google it, you can find it. It calls for the destruction of Israel and the killing of Jews. So the bottom line is, if you know these things, if your eyes are open, if you're aware of them, then you can't be silent in the face of something like this. We need to give people the ammunition. We need, especially young people, because that 18 to 29-year-old group, they're getting a lot of their information from social media. And on social media, you know, you can write, anybody with a keyboard can write anything that they want, pretty much. It's not like there are any controls on this. So we need to be able to give people the facts so that they can say, no, you know, this is what you're calling for is the equivalent of a genocide. So that's what I do these days, is I teach about the Holocaust. I get wonderful people like Ellen who come to Yad Vashem and then go out into the world and do amazing, amazing things. Like Ellen, like other people who, other teachers who I'm still in touch with, who write to me and have been sending messages of support since October 7th, and a mail that I just got this morning about a valedictorian in a tiny little town in Texas who during Christmas week, instead of giving a speech about how much fun they're going to have, or instead of playing games at their ceremony, she actually spoke about how important it is to be educated about this stuff and how important it is to be aware of anti-Semitism when it's happening. You can't ask for more than that, right? So that's what I traded my legal career for, and I'm much happier that I did it. So that's really the end of my speech. I'm happy to be here. Thank you again, Ellen, for inviting me. And if anybody has any questions, very happy to take them. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I'm going to repeat the question just for the people on Zoom. Does Yad Vashem subsidize or provide scholarships for teachers? We underpay them, the fact, to go to Israel for these programs. And how can us as the general population support Yad Vashem in that effort?
Thanks for the question. Yes, the answer is yes. Echoes and Reflections, which is the project that I direct at Yad Vashem, we are funded by some wonderful donors. And so we have the budget to bring teachers to pay for their airfare, or at least when Ellen came, we paid for airfare. These days we're paying a little bit less, but we still pay for tuition and room and board and trips within Israel to different places. So we do have that. Listen, Yad Vashem will never turn down a donation, because Yad Vashem is also being hit these days very hard by all the competing. I mean, there are a lot of very, very worthwhile, worthy organizations that need donations. And so while Echoes and Reflections is donor funded, we actually have private donors. For instance, I have a donor now from Las Vegas who decided that she wants teachers from Las Vegas, from the Nevada area. She wants to bring them to Israel. She wants them to be taught so that they can go out into Las Vegas and teach the community there. And she is funding 2 seats at the seminar this summer, which we certainly hope will happen. So yeah, you can, feel free.
Edie.
Go ahead.
How do you teach the teachers to engage the students so they will hear the message? That's
a great question, and that's really the root, which is why Echoes and Reflections, the program that we work with, Echoes and Reflections doesn't have just dry history texts. What we believe, and this is Yad Vashem philosophy, what we believe is that you tell a human story. You don't talk about 6 million people. You can talk about my mother's story. You can talk about the story that I told you with Kurt Messerschmidt. Once you have a human story in your brain, you have a picture of a person, of a human being, and it's much more absorbable. It's much more assimilatable. And that way, the story stays with you, even if you don't remember how many Jews were killed at Auschwitz and when the gas chambers at Treblinka started working and the names and the dates and the statistics and all that stuff. Once you have a human story, then you're halfway there. And we do that through art and poetry and literature. Testimonies are a big, big part of that. And the testimonies that we use are testimonies that were done by Steven Spielberg as part of the USC Shoah Foundation. By the way, his foundation now is also taking testimonies from the victims of October 7th. Yeah. And he's preserving them.
Yeah.
This vast collection of 50 states, Montana, Texas, Arkansas, how do you reach the teachers who aren't going to the college? They're the majority, and they're the ones relating the story, hopefully, to all these kids who are the 20%.
Right.
So how do you have a magnifying effect for, there's the few teachers that go, and we obviously have a vast country of 50 states.
So apropos the 50 states, I just want to say only 26 states have mandatory Holocaust education these days. So that's also something to be aware of. Each state does it differently. Each state sees its responsibility differently. And that's sometimes a problem, sometimes a blessing, but it's something that you have to take into account. What we do at Echoes and Reflections is we do professional development. Every time I come to the States, generally, this is a complete vacation for me this time, except for being here. But usually every time I come to the States, I'm doing at least 5 or 6 professional developments in different areas of the country. And we have our boots on the ground. One of our partners in Echoes and Reflections is the ADL. They have a huge staff here, and they really do professional development all over the country. So I get here 2 or 3 times a year, and I do professional development in different places. But they're here all the time. And so they are working with teachers really all over the States.
Harold?
Sure. Right.
So the question is, Darrell Horn wrote an article in The Atlantic this past spring criticizing Holocaust education in America, and whether he knows that I have a response.
So first of all, it was such a great article. I slept with it under my pillow for a couple of weeks. Really a great article, and I really respect her. She's a voice, and you have to take what she says seriously. I think Holocaust education was never really started to be, to combat anti-Semitism. That wasn't the purpose of it. It was started to be education about the Holocaust. And I think what's happening now is that the more anti-Semitism rears its ugly head and gets higher and higher, the more we are trying through Holocaust education to combat anti-Semitism. But I take her point that what we should be doing, and this is something that Echoes and Reflections does. So patting ourselves on the back here, what we try and do is we try and educate, because again, getting back to that 2% number, if only 2% of the population of the United States is Jewish, then there are a lot of people out there who've never met a Jew in their lives, right? They don't know who Jews are. They don't know what we are. They don't know whether or not we have horns. I had that experience once in the summer camp that I went to in upstate New York, where somebody asked me, "Where are your horns?" Seriously. So what we need to do is we need to teach about who Jews are and what we do and what are our customs and what are our traditions, what are our holidays, what are the things that we aspire to. The whole issue of Zionism being this goal, this lifelong dream for people who way back in Europe, prior to World War II, that was their dream. We need to teach this stuff so that people understand who we are. We don't want them to think of us just as victims, which was to her point. We want them to think of us as living, breathing entities that are contributing to society, that have something to say, that have these time-respected customs, and that we've been around for so long. So yes, we do try to do that. We really do.
Our school board president, Rebecca. Okay.
Mhm. So, so the question really quickly is, how can we add or also cooperate, make them mutually inclusive Holocaust education with the idea of just of civics or civil rights teaching, and teaching the idea that everybody has civil rights. So if we're going to dehumanize, how do we rehumanize, would be the best way I would put it. So I agree with you that too much is being put on Holocaust education to accomplish this. But at the same time, if you look at Germany in the 1930s and you look to see what happened as chaos escalated in Germany, and with the platform of the National Socialist Party when it came to power, and the rights that were stripped away little by little, and those are the kind of testimonies that we have in Echoes and Reflections, then school children, middle school, high school pupils start to understand how important rights are, and how important, how easy it is for a government to take them away. So that is something that we can touch on. For instance, one of the great worksheets that we have in Echoes is a list of rights that you wouldn't think about: the right to own pets, the right to marry who you choose, the right to live where you choose. We're not even talking about freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. These are basic rights. And what we do is we have the students rank them. Which are the most important to you? And then at the end of the lesson, they start to understand these are things that they take for granted. And all of this was taken away from the Jews in the 1930s, step by step by step. They may not remember every single law, but they don't need to remember the laws. It's the point that it is that easy to take rights away from people. If you're not careful, if you're not watching, like the frog that's, the frog in the pot of water where the temperature is being turned up and up and up. You don't realize it at the beginning, but by the end. And that's one of the great things that the Holocaust teaches, is what happens because Germany was a democracy. And how did that democracy just crumble? How did it fall apart? So that is something that you can teach with the Holocaust. But I agree with you completely that too much emphasis is put. There has to be a lot of other stuff going on at the same time. A lot of other civics education.
Abe and Ruthie and then Manny.
Right now we are really just middle and high school, because that's the way our founder wanted it, our founder and our donor. His emphasis was middle and high school, because those are the people that you have to reach. Those are the people who are still being molded, that they're still kind of forming their worldview. So college didn't enter into it, although I know that there are professors in the United States at certain colleges, like the College of the Pacific, that do use Echoes and Reflections resources. So, yeah.
Ruthie. So the question is, the Jews are disunited, and how does that, what do we do? Because it clearly affects our ability to then combat anti-Semitism.
That's a great question. But you know the old joke, right? You have two, what is it? Two Jews, three opinions, yeah. I think this has always been the problem, probably always will be the problem, but on this at the same time, it's also what makes us think out of the box, what makes us more creative, what makes us more multifaceted. You can see it as a problem, and it is a problem. I remember years ago when BDS was first making the rounds of universities, and the feeling was, we really need to do something about BDS. How are we going to fight this? And we could never get it together. There were so many different Jewish organizations that were all fighting it in different ways. It's a problem.
We're trying about that Jews are joining things. Manny, and then Ron, and then I think we'll conclude.
Yeah. Well, that's a big question.
He used to be a middle school principal, by the way. Getting all the educators.
Listen, I really can't assess. I can tell you that Holocaust centers do a lot of good. But I can also tell you that the trend recently, in the last 10 years, more than that, is that Holocaust centers are turning, used to be that Holocaust centers were founded by survivors. And the survivors were the ones who were concerned. The survivors were the ones who put their money where their mouth was. The survivors were the ones who were establishing these centers. And now what's happening as survivors are leaving us is that the Holocaust centers are turning into Holocaust and human rights, or Holocaust and genocide, or Holocaust and anything that you can think of, tolerance. So there's a big difference between just being a Holocaust center and being tied to all of these other missions. There are very few Holocaust centers left that are just Holocaust centers. Yad Vashem is one of them in the world, and there are a few in the United States, but for the most part, the newer people who are coming in and being on the board or giving money, they're the ones who want to broaden the mission. And the question arises, when you broaden a mission like that, do you have too many things to do at one time? You can't really pay attention to the focus of your mission. So that's a problem these days. That is definitely a problem.
So Manny set it up to introduce Moshe Pomerati, who's the new executive director of our local Holocaust and Tolerance Center in Glencoe. So you can have a conversation. Obviously, one day we'll have you up to share with that. Finally, Ron.
And no offense intended.
No, she was smiling about the challenge.
Okay, because it's happening everywhere. Yeah.
So what do we do about, obviously in the Middle East, but probably elsewhere in the world where the anti-Semitism is being taught in the textbooks?
I think the first thing is that you have to make people aware of this. We are aware of it. We are very sensitive to it. But the rest of the world is kind of, so what's the big deal if UNRWA, what's the big deal if a teacher in UNRWA is hiding hostages? What's the big deal if they find Mein Kampf? First of all, we have to say to the world, look, this can't happen. I mean, that is very much like Nazi Germany. It's like any place where the youth are the ones who are indoctrinated. And that's a very, very important thing. If the youth are indoctrinated, then they are the ones who are going to be spreading this message. They're the most vocal element of the population. They're the ones who are going out, and they're the ones who are on social media. First, we have to make the world aware of this. And then we have to, in terms of the UN, I don't know what we can expect from them. Yeah. So I wish that I could be more positive, but we have to make a bigger case of it. We have to make a real issue of it so that the Washington Post and the New York Times can't just skim over this as though it's no big deal. It shouldn't be business as usual. Education is very important. And what we teach children is very important, and that's the narrative that they go out into the world with. And so if at age 3 and 4 and 5, this is what they're being taught, it's a big problem.
I've been given the very pleasant task of just concluding for us, and I just want to thank you, Sheryl, just for everything that you brought, for the work that you're doing, for sharing it, to thank Ellen for bringing her here, to thank David and Rob for the work that they do with our Holocaust committee, and within the broader community, to thank Rebecca and Moji for what it is that you are each doing. And I want to just take this opportunity because we need to recognize and celebrate. And I'm looking around and I see a lot of people here who are or who have been during the course of their careers educators. And can you just stand up if you view yourself as an educator, please? Okay. All right. So thank you. For this incredible work. Obviously, the Shoah, it is about the Jewish people. It's not just about the Jewish people. And the lessons, they are unique to us, but they're also universal, and really finding that balance and sharing it with the world when people are young enough, hopefully, to still be able to absorb and to learn. It's incredibly important, and we continue to do this work together. So thank you, Yishar Koach, Chazak u'Baruch. And have a wonderful Shabbat, everybody. If you have any more questions or comments, do you mind sticking around if people have further?
Sure.
Okay. So Sheryl, we'll stick around if people have further thoughts or questions.